business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. This is our last program of 2017. It is our weekend edition. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We're going to look back at some of the stories from 2017, as well as a couple of things that have happened even this week, and look ahead to 2018. Penna Dexter with me, as always, and we have invited back into the opportunity to hear from Colonel Allen West, who also, of course, served as a member of Congress, served 22 years in the Army. And Colonel West, always great to have you with us as well.
It's always a pleasure, and Happy New Year to you both.
Happy New Year.
Let's, Penna, if we can, mention that since Kelly Shackelford isn't here, we'll talk about it without him. And it turns out that Allen West has written about this as well. We mentioned it yesterday. Well, let me come back to it again today. That is, the Oregon Court of Appeals ruled against Aaron and Melissa Klein. These are the owners of Sweet Cakes. And so as a result, that resulted in a $135,000 penalty. Now, Kelly caught me in the parking lot the other day to say at least they removed the gag order, but that's about the only positive news from this. What else?
They weren't allowed to talk about their beliefs about marriage, which was really ridiculous. And apparently the $125,000 or $135,000 was being held in sort of an escrow account pending these court cases. Well, this is the Court of Appeals of Oregon. It's actually the highest court of appeals there. So I guess the next step would be perhaps at the Circuit Court of Appeals in that area of the country. And I know First Liberty will keep moving on this case, but Aaron and Melissa Klein are such a compelling young couple with this bakery, and they were baking wedding cakes. I think most people are familiar with the story. And someone came in and wanted a cake for a same-sex union. It was even before same-sex marriage was legal in Oregon. And, of course, the Kleins lost their bakery over this, and now they've been even fined. So in the progression of cases, we have the Masterpiece Bakery case that's at the Supreme Court now. And, we don't know how that's going to go. It could be a very limited ruling, could go the wrong way, could go the right way. But it's good that this case is moving along behind it, I think, because the facts in it, I think, are very compelling. As Kelly said, it sure would be good if this one gets to the Supreme Court, if there's another Trump-appointed justice before that time.
One of the things we have as a link is to allenwest.com. And again, that is one of those issues that you have written about. So, Colonel West, what about this decision coming down from the Oregon Court of Appeals?
Well, it's very disturbing. And I have met Aaron and Melissa Klein when I was out in the Pacific Northwest. Like you say, a great young couple, and their lives have been completely torn apart. What I see happening with this case and what we have before Masterpiece Bakery is all of a sudden, the left has created this religious belief, man-made climate change or now same-sex marriage. And really the Supreme Court in Obergefell versus Hodges, they do not have the constitutional enumerated power or authority to create a law. So for the Supreme Court to say same-sex marriage is the law of the land, I find that very, very strange. But what we have to understand is that now when you look at what has happened to Aaron and Melissa, your religious beliefs can be criminalized, and therefore you can be fined for it. And so what I did was some research going back and looking at the multimillionaire from Colorado who's a big funder of the radical LGBT movement, Tim Gill, and he's talked about how Christians need to be punished. And so I would tell you that you're going to see more of these cases. We know about the one with the florist up in the state of Washington, the portrait studio owner down in Mexico where they were also fined. You're going to see more of these things. But what really is disconcerting, even more so, was that the Trump administration just renominated Chai Feldblum back to the EEOC commission. And if you look at some of the things she has said, she said, in the cases where religious liberty come in contact with sexual liberty, I see no instance where religious liberty should win over sexual liberty. That is very, disturbing for someone that will be sitting on the EEOC commission to have that perspective.
And that's what it's really come down to in a lot of these situations now, Colonel West, is the battle between, it's a religion of the sexual revolution almost, and Christianity.
It is. And the thing is that what the Oregon Appeals Court just said is your very first right of your constitutional individual rights, which is the freedom of religion, it means nothing when it comes up to what we perceive as, what we have declared is an individual right. So, and then to have a gag order saying that you can't talk about your own religious beliefs. I mean, let's not talk about what the belief was in, but you can't talk about your own religious beliefs. And so think about it. One too long ago, Annise Parker, the openly lesbian mayor of Houston, demanded that pastors subpoena their sermons. So, as I wrote in the piece, what is next? I mean, the Bible in Leviticus and also Romans talks against same-sex relationships. Is someone going to bring up a case that says that, the Bible should be banned, or, these preachings should be banned because it's not in concert with what we see as the law of the land now?
Penna, one of the things we've talked about, and it was in my commentary yesterday, is that if this trend continues in the wrong direction, then Christians have to say, well, do I want to be a baker or a photographer or an innkeeper or a florist? But my commentary yesterday expanded that to medicine, because Ezekiel Emanuel, that last name sounds familiar because his brother is, of course, the mayor of Chicago, actually said in the New England Journal of Medicine that doctors only have one of two choices. Either they can go into a profession where there aren't any ethical issues, like, say, radiology, or else they just need to leave the medical profession. And so this is a case, the Jack Phillips case, and of course this Aaron and Melissa Klein case, that have longer-reaching implications than just a few bakers in, say, Colorado or Oregon, don't they?
Yeah, I think the low-hanging fruit was the wedding vendors, because it was a quote-unquote marriage, same-sex marriages. But, of course, we've always battled this conscience issue with regard to abortion. And so it's always been a battle, but it's basically been protected. But, with Obamacare and just the changes in medicine, this could change. And I mean, it's going to affect all kinds of businesses. We're going to see it in places that are going to surprise us. And that's why I think it needs to, the battles need to go to court, and they need to be, we need to have the religious liberty, our First Amendment religious liberty, shored up. But we also need to be strategic about it and do it at a time when we feel like if it does reach the highest court in the land, that court is going to be comprised of, because it's obviously President Trump is going to have the opportunity to appoint a couple of justices. So timing, I think, is everything. We have to be wise and shrewd and strategic about this.
You're absolutely right. And you've already seen it, as you talked about with the Obamacare contraception mandate, and Steve Green of Hobby Lobby had to go to court about that, because here was the government telling him that your faith, your belief, your religion does not transcend to your business. And so, in other words, what the progressive socialist left is telling Christians is that you have a freedom of worship, and we'll define the space or the area of worship, but you do not truly have a freedom of religion if it comes in contact against our ideological agenda and our beliefs. That's the strategic battle that we need to see. And therefore, because nothing is coincidental, okay? As a military guy, you look for indicators and trends. So you look at what has happened, like you say, with the florists, with the portrait studios, with these bakers, what's happened with Steve Green, Hobby Lobby, what happened with Little Sisters of the Poor. This is a wholehearted effort by the left to undermine the Judeo-Christian faith heritage in America.
Penna Dexter, Alan West in studio. We will come back and we'll talk about whether or not the capital should be in Jerusalem. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
If I were to ask you which professions have high suicide rates, you would probably mention military veterans suffering from PTSD. In their latest report, the Centers for Disease Control have found that the suicide rate for young male military veterans is higher than previously thought. but they found that it is lower in some states than the suicide rate for farmers. The high suicide rate for farmers is only now just beginning to get media attention. Mike Rossman is a psychologist who has been studying this issue for decades and has an appreciation for the stresses on farmers since he is also an Iowa farmer. Writing in the journal Behavioral Healthcare, he reminds us that farming has always been a stressful occupation because many of the factors that affect agricultural production are largely beyond the control of the producers. This is borne out by the latest statistics from the CDC. If you focus on all the people working in agriculture, farmers, farm laborers, ranchers, fishers, and lumber harvesters, they take their lives at a rate higher than any other occupation. The suicide rate for agricultural workers in 17 states is nearly 5 times higher compared to that of the general population. The reasons for this are many. Farmers are often reluctant to seek help. Often their farms are far away from healthcare centers. Pesticide exposure can lead to depression. They are isolated, and the cost of feed and equipment continues to rise while the prices they receive for food and fiber remain stagnant. This is a healthcare crisis that deserves attention. Perhaps this is the first time you've even heard about the suicide rate of farmers. Making citizens and politicians aware of this crisis is the first step. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, by the way, if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Alan West in studio with us today. And Alan West, let me talk about one of the articles we've posted here. Just days after slamming the UN for voting against the U.S., Nikki Haley delivers brutal blow. I guess there's two issues. Number one, does it make sense to move our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem? Then what about 128 countries voting against us to do what I think would be pretty straightforward if it were any other nation other than Israel?
Well, what is absolutely absurd is that these 128 nations voted against a law that was passed in the United States in 1995. But we finally decided we would act upon the law. So who is this global body politic to tell us, what we should be doing as a sovereign nation? So that's the number one thing that we should be upset about with the UN. But it's just a matter of history, Kerby. As you well know, before Emperor Hadrian declared the region to be Palestinia, with the root word coming back to the Philistines, there was a Jerusalem, a millennia before that. So for us or anyone to sit around and say that Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine, that shows someone that is ignorant, that is dismissive of history, and we should not kowtow to this or be held hostage to people that use violence in order to advance their objectives. And so I applaud Donald Trump, President Trump, for doing something that every single other president should have done. Jerusalem and the Israel's existence is not deterring the peace process. The fact that people continue to use Islamic terrorism is what, and harbor Islamic terrorism is what is, restricting the peace process. And I applaud Nikki Haley for looking at these folks up there, these despots and dictators with a steely eye, and cutting $250 million from their budget.
I've always wondered what it is about the United Nations that sort of kowtows U.S. governments, and we've waited through several Republican and Democrat administrations to finally do this. And the idea of defunding the UN, pulling back on our budget to the UN has been something that I've always felt that we should have done a long time ago. I mean, we pay for things that we disagree with. We pay the largest share of money to the UN. It's based on your ability to pay. That's how you're assessed. But what about, based on what you actually benefit as a country from it? I mean, I would really love to see us pull back further. And I think listening to Nikki Haley, and I agree, she's very strong and she's the perfect person to be in that position. I never even would have thought of it. But for some reason, Donald Trump saw that she would just be great there. And she's been so principled in her statements and so clear in them. And then she's followed them up. And our government has stood behind that. So I think this would be a great first step for defunding lots of parts of the United Nations.
Yeah, we pay 22% of their $5.4 billion budget. And by far, we're the largest. So almost 1/4 of their budget is paid by the United States of America. Look, we should just pull back and say, hey, you got rent-free property over here. That's good enough. But when you think about it, NATO has served a purpose. And NATO, I mean, they still have some issues, but NATO has a function. I do not understand what the function of the United Nations is anymore, because when you look at what is happening in North Korea, people fail to remember that the armistice that was signed was between the United Nations and North Korea. It was not between the United States and North Korea. So why isn't the United Nations doing more to combat and confront Kim Jong-un? We just came to find out that China was cheating with oil shipments into North Korea. So where's the resolution against China? But I want to come back to a point you made. Nikki Haley is without a doubt, if we want to go back and do a review of 2017, she is the brightest star in the Trump administration. When she was first announced to be the ambassador to the UN, the left absolutely disparaged her and denigrated her in every single way, shape, form, or fashion. But I'm telling you right now, you can write it down, this will end up being the first woman president in the United States of America.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say in 2024, first president, vice president will be Alan West, and I think we'll have a great administration in 2024, right?
I just want to hang out here with y'all.
But I have heard lots of people say that Nikki Haley might indeed be the odds-on favorite into 2024, which is just amazing to me. But just think of that, Penna.
Yeah, well, it's actually, it's a good thought.
Yeah.
Makes me smile.
Well, again, that is the first article we have, but the second one I wanted to get to as well, because we're going to lose Alan West in the second hour. No, tax cuts don't kill people. Now, we have been hearing all about the fact that this tax cut is Armageddon, the end of the world as we know it, life and death. Push grandma over the cliff. We've heard it all before, but what about this? Alan West, I'd love to get your thoughts as well, because, again, we are being told that this will be the reason that we will have the Democratic blue wave in 2018. So as we look ahead to the fact we'll be in another election season, will the tax cut help the Republicans, hurt the Republicans, help the Democrats, hurt the Democrats? Your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to go back to the infamous words of James Carville. It's the economy, stupid. And if people are getting back to work, if people start to see themselves having a little bit more prosperity, and one of the things that the Republicans should do, somehow they ought to work with the ADP or whoever. There should be a little thing, an asterisk on the pay stubs or whatever that says this is how much you saved, to remind people, because we have that short-term span. But the Republicans have done a good thing. They kind of had to after falling on their face with health care. I wish that the individual side, the tax cuts were permanent. I wish that we did not have the carried interest deduction, because that's a talking point for the folks on the left. But overall, the over-the-top hyperbole is not going to get the Democrats to where they need to be, especially, like I say, when people start seeing themselves able to do more and have a little bit more in their paychecks. What are we going to go back to if the Democrats get in control? Because the only thing they want to do is impeach the president. We don't want to go back to, 1% GDP growth when we've had 3 consecutive quarters of 3+ to 3.3% GDP growth. We are seeing less people on the food stamp rolls and in poverty when we saw an astronomical increase in the 8 years of the Obama administration. So what is it that the Democrats want to take us back to? And when you have a party that has no message, and they truly don't, they have no message other than hate Trump and Russian collusion, and really the Mueller thing is falling apart. They are the ones that wanted to go away. they don't have anywhere to go. The problem with the Republican Party, and you and I have talked about this before, they're the worst marketers and the worst messengers that we have ever seen in the world. So somehow they've got to get someone to come in and get them on point and on message.
Yeah, and I think in a sense, Donald Trump's tweets are the marketing message right now that's actually, in a sense, it's irritating people, but in another sense, it also works. It causes people to think about issues. And, you know, with this tax cut, I mean, I don't see how it can not help the economy in so many ways. And, you know, they can demagogue it all they want and say corporations are evil. And, you know, this isn't fair and all of the above. And we can throw out our numbers and try to prove them otherwise. But what's really going to be the proof is just a few months down the road. Well, next month when people see a paycheck with a little bit more money in it. And then as the economy begins to react to this, you're going to see most of the boats lifted. And it's going to be undeniable, really. People are going to, I mean, this is what wins the argument. James Carville was right. And so it's going to be fun to watch it. I mean, I'm kind of excited they're not going to have an argument.
Think about how many corporations said that they would be giving out end-of-year bonuses when this was signed.
Or raising the wage to their minimum wage in the company to $15 an hour, which the left has been asking for.
And one of the reasons we do Point of View is because sometimes you only hear some of these things on Point of View. We went through the list of those companies, for example, that actually said they were going to give bonuses and they were going to raise the minimum wage. And, of course, we talked about how 52% of Americans actually were convinced that their taxes were going to go up, which is great. But, again, one of the reasons as we come to the last program of 2017, want to remember one more time that we have a matching challenge. And, of course, a couple of weeks ago, we had Foster Freeze put out $45,000 as a match for our 45 years of broadcasting. That's now up to $65,000. We have not met the match yet. So if you have said, well, I want to put you over, you can do so even as we go to a break. We have a banner that you can click on, and that will give you a chance to actually make a donation, and $10 becomes $20, $100 becomes $200, $500 becomes $1,000. Also, if you'd like to talk to someone off air, I know some of you may not have a computer, would just like to make a quick phone call. We do have that order line number, 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. And if you're like me, I tend to still write those checks out, but you better get it in the mail today, at the least tomorrow, because after all, that's the postmark that's going to have to be on it as well. So take the time to send it to Point of View, Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. But again, the simplest is simply to go to our website. You can see the matching challenge counting down. Every few seconds here, we're watching it count down, and this is our last broadcast of 2017. So if you've been waiting for the last day, this is the last day. We need to hear from you. 1-800-347-5151 or pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
When you think of something urgent, what comes to mind? You get hurt in an accident. You want help urgently. Your team is down by 4 with 90 seconds left. That's an urgent situation of a different kind. But how about this? Point of View has a matching challenge that ends when the calendar hits 2018. Christians like you have made an impact through Point of View for 45 years. You've helped shape hearts and minds, leading to amazing things in communities from coast to coast and beyond, shaping the future for the better. Many would say America's moral, political, and cultural situation is urgent, that our homeland needs biblical wisdom urgently. Please stop for a moment right now and give. Your investment will be doubled up to $65,000 thanks to a generous matching challenge. Time is up. Please give now. Visit pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. The need is urgent, and any amount doubles. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Alan West in studio with us today. We're kind of looking back over 2017, looking ahead to 2018. And Alan West with us for another half hour before we have to send him on his way. And one of the things we talked about, Alan, just a minute ago, is how people don't really understand that, for example, 52% in one survey thought their taxes would go up. Now, think this through. 70% of people get a standard deduction. If you double the standard deduction, if you knew nothing else about that, you'd think, I think my taxes are going down. Of course, we know that 80% of the people will find their taxes going down. The other one that I would love to have you talk about in this article here is 13 million people will lose their health insurance. What about that issue?
Well, you know, it was the Nazi minister of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, who said, if you tell a lie often enough and keep repeating it, eventually it becomes the truth. And this is exactly what you see happening. And that's why I say the GOP has to be better messengers. And they have to be able to message something in a minute and a half to 2 minutes. That's how you really have to convey it. You got to break it down very simple. And the president uses the Twitter as his direct means. I mean, Roosevelt had the fireside chats. President Trump has the Twitter. But what we need to have are, you know, these Republicans that forcefully go on ABC, CBS, what's the other, NBC, CNN, PBS, and they really need to have a condensed message. They all need to be on the same talking point. What you find is that the Democrats are always speaking the exact same.
It's amazing.
I mean, it's
you
like
can play one clip after another.
After another.
And they're
it's like
just
a
the
chip.
same words.
A chip has been implanted. Yeah. And the Republicans get out that there's 6,000 different directions. I mean, and so it's very confusing. So, you know, when you talk about the millions of people who are going to lose their health care, guess what? When you tell people they don't have to do it, the government is no longer mandating it, or else you are penalized, fined, the individual mandate, Americans will make decisions, say, hey, maybe I don't want to do it. Yeah. I mean, when we were all young, we thought we were invincible. I mean, when I was a young 22-year-old paratrooper, I didn't think anything could hurt me, not even a bullet. And so, you know, that's just how we were. And so you're going to have that happen. What the Obamacare was an expansion of Medicaid, that's all. And no one has ever simply sat down and explained that to the American people. But the most important thing is they've got to see an increase in their wages. They see the increase in the paycheck. They see the increase from, you know, the minimum wage at certain corporations going up to $15. They get the holiday bonus and what have you. The most important thing we need to have out there are these business leaders. They need to talk to their employees. They need to get the employees to understand how these policies are helping them and not turn off the folks, the talking heads.
Speaking of short messages to be sent, I thought the one that Ted Cruz sent this week was interesting because there's been this accusation about the tax cut that, well, why does the corporate tax cut get to be permanent and the individual tax cut expires in 10 years? Well, you know, if it's helping the economy, the Congress will renew it, of course. But just leaving that aside, it was interesting that Ted Cruz said, well, if any Democrats had actually participated in this and supported a tax cut, then we would not have had to use reconciliation and we wouldn't have had to have this 10-year limit on it. And so he then, because Bernie Sanders, of course, in their famous debates, has made this point to Ted Cruz, he just threw it right back at him.
I thought that was good.
And said, well, I've already got a bill written that would make these tax cuts permanent. Why don't you co-sponsor it with me, Bernie?
And that's the third article, by the way.
Yeah. And now Bernie's running around freaking out. Oh, no, I don't want to work with you.
And again, if the best talking point is that in 2023, the taxes might go up, that's not a really good talking point, especially since you know that probably in 2018 they probably will make them permanent, right?
Yeah, they should make them permanent. But one of the things that I was not happy about on the individual side, if you remember, President Trump wanted 3 tax brackets.
Right.
The House wanted 4. Then it was the Senate that came back and said, well, we'll just keep all 7. And we'll just lower that top bracket 2%. you're really not doing what is necessary. It's still basically a wealth redistribution scheme, and that's what a progressive tax code system is all about. I want to see us move away from penalizing people because they work hard and they're doing well and they're being successful. Let's get back to a flat tax system. I think that if you wanted, the three different brackets, 10, 15, 20 or somewhere in there, four brackets, okay, 10, 15, 20, 25. You have the pass-through for the small businesses at the same as the corporate business tax rate, 20 to 21, somewhere in there. But the most important thing, no one ever talks about how we're going to rein in the wasteful federal government spending. That's the key thing.
That is going to be the key.
We don't have a tax revenue problem in the United States of America. We have a spending problem. That's why we keep running these deficits.
Yeah, that was one of the things Wall Street Journal said the other day. We've voted for dessert first. Now it's the vegetables if we want to cut some costs, and that's certainly one of those issues. Let me take a phone call real quickly, just along the way. And in South Carolina, Josh, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm like a 29-year-old software engineer. My salary is around $75,000, $80,000 a year. I don't know anything about the tax bill, and I was wondering if you could let me know. Does it help me? Does it hurt me? What's in it for me?
And again, the bottom line is that, first of all, one of the things we've posted both on the website, pointofview.net, as well as on the Facebook page for Point of View, was something that was done recently. I think it was by it was by the Tax Foundation. And they had 8 different individuals ranging from a single person to married people, those who use standard deductions, others that itemize their deductions, some that have children, some that don't. And the reality is you probably itemize, but if you don't, then the answer is real simple, because if your standard deduction is been doubled, you can kind of figure out very quickly that means that less of your taxable income will be taxed and your taxes will probably go down. But if you look at that, you can kind of find somebody that looks a little bit like you and find a pretty good idea of what that would actually be like.
Really, if you want to make it a little bit simple, maybe a little bit oversimplified, but not too much. If you are not a high-income person who lives in a high-tax state, then you're going to be helped here. Yeah. The only people that might lose is if they're in the very high income and they pay high state and local taxes, like in New York and California and some of those places. They may end up paying a little bit more, but everybody else is going to benefit from this.
Well, I got to ask a former congressman then about this issue, and that is, up until recently, we've said that if you're in a high tax state and you have state taxes, you could deduct all of that. But some people have said that doesn't seem fair, because people that live in states, you used to be a member of Congress from Florida, we're broadcasting today from Texas, don't have a state income tax. Aren't we, in some respects, subsidizing other states that have high taxes in those states?
No, you're absolutely right. And I would tell the caller, be ready for all those people coming down from New York that's going to move into South Carolina. They'll change your politics like we're trying to fight against these Californians coming here to Texas. Look, I just saw Governor Cuomo of New York talk about how this is economic civil war and the GOP is waging war against the blue states. The blue states are the ones that have been using this to cover their failure with their economic and tax policies. When you look at a state like California, that I'm glad that our caller's not there, because he would be paying a 13.3% state income tax rate in California on top of, all the other taxes, just the same as in New York. I mean, New York City, I don't know how anyone takes $1 home when you look at the borough tax and this tax and that tax, the state tax and federal taxes. So now the onus is on, Governor Cuomo, Governor Brown, the incoming governor of New Jersey, the governors of Rhode Island, Connecticut, Illinois. Get your act together and get your fiscal house in order, because what these blue state governors have been doing is using the tax code as a means by which they promote their ideological agenda so that they can give free benefits and everything to people here illegally. That should not be happening. So now these individuals are not going to have that cover in these states, and I say this is how it should be. And again, I wish the carried interest deduction would have gone away as well. But my big concern is that the influx of people coming from these states to successful red states like a Florida, like a Texas, like a Tennessee, and then all of a sudden they flip those states. And the next thing you know, we have more Californias and New Yorks and New Jerseys out there.
Or they might show up and say, hey, this is pretty interesting, coming to a state of Texas, and they only actually go into the legislative session 90 days every once in a while. You might say that's a pretty good deal. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But back to Josh's question, and the question I think a lot of you have. We posted this a couple of weeks ago, and it's still available both on our Facebook page as well as at Point of View, in which they give you 8 different scenarios. Some people are single, some are married, some have standard deductions, some itemized deductions, different incomes, some have businesses, some are single parents, others are single without kids. And you can kind of real quickly kind of say, okay, I look sort of like that one. But it was interesting the other day, CBS said, we're going to look at 3 different families and see if their taxes would go down. And they were all shocked to find out all 3 of them had their taxes go down. Mm-hmm. And again, it's going to be more than 80% of you will benefit from this tax reform bill that was signed by the president. We'll take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
We're at a moment in our history in which prayer during cabinet meetings is a bit disconcerting to many members of the media who cover the White House. Unusual and striking, even creepy, were words reporters used to describe a recent moment of prayer about the passage of historic tax legislation. The president seemed to enjoy taunting reporters a bit when, just as the bill gained final congressional approval, he took time at a cabinet meeting to call for prayer in gratitude for the success of tax-cutting and reforming efforts. President Trump turned the floor over to Dr. Ben Carson, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Dr. Carson led his fellow cabinet members in thanking God that they and the president had been willing to face the winds of controversy in pushing for this legislation. He expressed gratitude for the unity in Congress and asked that God would cause that unity to spread beyond party lines. And then Dr. Carson prayed, and I'm quoting him, "In this time of discord, distrust, and dishonesty, we ask that you will give us a spirit of gratitude, compassion, and common sense, and give us the wisdom to be able to guide this great nation in the future. We ask in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." What a great model to use as we pray for our government leaders. This prayer acknowledges what believers everywhere know. Our help is in the name of the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. As the new year begins, let's pray that our administration and our Congress will continue to take actions like this tax cut that will reduce government control over our lives. We should also thank God for the numerous, largely unsung accomplishments of 2017, especially the confirmation of many judges who understand that our rights come from God, not government. When flawed human leaders humbly ask God for strength and help, it's good. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is Weekend Edition. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, as well as Alan West. And one other article that I wanted to put on the table here, a Democratic blue wave in 2018. And somebody says, not so fast. What we hear right now, Alan West, is that, well, look at the special election in Alabama. Look at the governor's election in Virginia. This is a blue wave coming. You're shaking your head, so obviously you disagree, just as the author of this article does.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, New Jersey is a blue state. Chris Christie was an anomaly there, and some of the things he's done it did not help the fact that the person running was his current lieutenant governor. So there was no way that they would be successful. Virginia, when you look at Virginia, the demographics there, Northern Virginia, which is tied to Washington, D.C., and oh, by the way, you might want to talk about the top 5 most lucrative counties in the United States of America all surround Washington, D.C.
Yes, they do.
Many of them in Northern Virginia. So that's government employee haven. So Virginia is struggling. I think it is the southernmost blue state now. So I don't look at Virginia either. And Roy Moore, the Democrats should have won that thing by 20 points. I mean, as much money and everything they spent going in to hamstring Roy Moore, which, of course, now I don't hear anything about accusations on Roy Moore now that he's lost. So I don't know where that went. That again, is an outlier. And in 2 years, Doug Jones has to run. He's just filling out Jeff Sessions' seat. You get a quality candidate that comes in there and runs, Doug Jones won't win. Now, what Chuck Schumer has to be concerned about is Doug Jones going to be a blue dog Democrat, a conservative, or he's going to try to play along with him. I think that if Doug Jones wants to stay a senator, he's going to be a blue dog Democrat. You look at what Joe Manchin and Klobuchar, up in North Dakota.
Sure.
So, no, there is no blue wave out there that's happening. If anything, you are going to see more backlash against the liberal progressive left and what they're doing because they have overplayed their hand. No one wants to go back to the failing economy. No one wants to go back to, all of these leftists that are doing the things to undermine this constitutional republic. We don't need any more sanctuary cities and sanctuary states. And so no, there is no blue wave that's going to happen. But the Republicans have to stand for something. They cannot be a lesser version of the other side.
Do you think, though, that the probable economic success coming from the tax cut will speak volumes?
It speaks huge. Like that's why I said, as James Carville said, is the economy stupid? People will not be concerned about anything else. If next summer they can load up their family in a car and they can go on a vacation.
And then you can say about the Democrat candidate, especially the one running for re-election, you didn't vote for this. Mm-hmm. You had nothing to do with the success that the country is seeing right now.
Yep, absolutely right. And they set themselves up to be hammered that way. They set themselves up so that everyone could say, you did not want to see my economic growth and prosperity.
That's kind of the Pottery Barn argument. You break it, you own it. Mm-hmm. Because the Democrats passed Affordable Care Act, known now as Obamacare, without a Republican vote. The Republicans have passed tax reform without a Democratic vote. Mm-hmm. So, again, if it does well, they do well. If it doesn't do well, or people don't know that it's doing well because the media sometimes doesn't cover some of those stories, I know that's a shock to you, then that's a problem too, isn't it?
That is a huge problem, and that's why the number one goal and objective for the Republicans going into 2018 is messaging and getting that message out there every single day, every single week, every single hour. They need to be talking about the growth of this economy. We're almost at Dow Jones 25K. Okay, how many record closings have we had since President Trump's election last year? And what is so funny is that now all of a sudden you have the Democrats saying, well, the economy is doing great because of Barack Obama. And ISIS has been defeated because, Barack Obama. They are struggling to find some semblance of success, something they can talk about, but they have nothing. And now we know that there's a level of corruption in the Federal Bureau of Investigation at the senior levels. They want to distance themselves from that. They have no message, but we have to show that we do have a message, and here are the results.
We'll probably talk about a little bit of that in the second hour when you leave, but when you look at the IRS, first of all, and then the FBI, even people that are kind of low information voters and don't pay attention to the stories like we do, know that something isn't quite right in some of these bureaucracies, don't they?
They absolutely know something isn't quite right. And when you have the Obama administration that unleashed the power of the most feared government agency, the IRS, on everyday American citizens who are using their First Amendment rights, and now we have an FBI that has gone completely off the rails at the senior levels. I'm not talking about the everyday agents, with partisan political hackery. The American people are concerned, and anyone that stands up to defend that, they're not going to support them.
You mentioned one thing earlier that I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but about the FBI and about the Mueller investigation, that the Democrats actually, they wish that would end now.
They wish that would end. And let me tell you something. We talked about how they all say the same thing. There's a reason why all these Democrats are out there trying to goad the president into firing Mueller because they want this investigation over. They want the Mueller investigation done because we're finding out more and more about the corruption inside the Mueller investigation, inside the FBI, and it is an intricate web. So they're trying to, use the hubris of President Trump, and he's been very smart. He said, no, we're not going to fire him. And, but there'll be a constitutional crisis. He's not going to do it, and they're stuck with it, and the American people are finding that they don't like this at all.
We talked about it might be a boomerang, and it certainly has turned out to be a boomerang.
It's hitting them hard. Absolutely.
We're just about out of time, and, we're coming to the end of our fiscal year, and I know that not only have you been willing to show up here to help us, but you have been a supporter. So I thought for just a minute you might just share why you've decided to support Point of View.
Kerby, you were so kind to me. When I moved here back in December 2014, a couple of days after Christmas, you had me in on this show, and I think it's so incredible that here we are, still with this incredible relationship. You've allowed me to guest host this show. There is no other place, really, that a true Christian constitutional conservative can go and understand all the incredible issues that are facing our country right now with solutions. And so I firmly support Point of View, and I want to tell you all out there, I just wrote a check for $500. And if I can write a check for $500 with one daughter in college, another daughter in PA school, and a wife that likes really nice things because her birthday was this month, her anniversary was this month, and Christmas. And you can't get one gift to cover them all, folks. So if I can squeeze out $500, you better squeeze out $500, or else I will visit you.
That's pretty intimidating, isn't it? Yes, thank you so very much for the gift. Penna, you've been around for a while, and you know, again, how we try to use the resources that God puts in our hands effectively.
Yes, very effectively, and there's nothing wasted here, I will say. But, we do depend on our listeners for support. We don't have commercials where we've got big companies supporting us. We've got people who listen, who benefit from this program. And I will say, we have a match on the table. Yes, the wonderful match from Foster Freese was completed, and we're so grateful to folks that stepped up. But there's still $20,000 more dollars. Maybe it's gone down today. I hope it has. But ladies and gentlemen, don't leave that money on the table. Help us, because when you do, it's going to be doubled. And that's throughout, really up until the end of the year. But today's the last day we can ask you for it, and we are asking.
Again, we've suggested, of course, you could make a one-time gift, and that means your $100 becomes $200, or $500 becomes $1,000. Some of you might want to actually join with us to be part of the Truth Team. $1 a day, $30 a month is $360 a year, and you can call that number 800-347-5151. And we've also mentioned you could give appreciated stock. This is the last day you could do that, but that is something we've talked about, and that would be a benefit for you. Don't sell it, because then you have to pay capital gains on it. Sell it, actually transfer it to us. We can actually sell it, and you get a benefit, and we do as well. So all sorts of ways in which you can participate. 800-347-5151, pointofview.net. And, of course, if you'd like to write to us, it's Point of View, Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas, 75221. Alan West, thank you for giving us an hour here today.
Happy New Year to you all, and I'll be cheering for my home state, Georgia Bulldogs, on New Year's Day. Go Dogs.
I knew it. Penna, you and I still have another hour to do it and finish this off. So, again, give us a call, 800-347-5151. We'll be right back.
When you think of something urgent, what comes to mind? You get hurt in an accident. You want help urgently. Your team is down by 4 with 90 seconds left. That's an urgent situation of a different kind. But how about this? Point of View has a matching challenge that ends when the calendar hits 2018. Christians like you have made an impact through Point of View for 45 years. You've helped shape hearts and minds, leading to amazing things in communities from coast to coast and beyond, shaping the future for the better. Many would say America's moral, political, and cultural situation is urgent, that our homeland needs biblical wisdom urgently. Please stop for a moment right now and give. Your investment will be doubled up to $65,000 thanks to a generous matching challenge. Time is up. Please give now. Visit pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. The need is urgent, and any amount doubles. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you would like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. The last broadcast of 2017. And Penna Dexter with me. In the first hour, we also had Colonel Alan West, former member of Congress, and we spent some time talking about some of these issues. We'll revisit a few of those. But at the same time, we also want to hear from you. What do you think were some of the most important stories of 2017? We always kind of like to look back in a rearview mirror, but then we're going to look out the windshield and look at 2018 as well. So if you have some comments, I know oftentimes have a lot of you just sit back and listen. When you got Alan West and you got Kelly Shackelford and Penna Dexter, you don't want to say anything, but we certainly want to get your comments as well. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. And one of the stories we covered in the first hour just briefly was the United Nations. It's the first article, and it's written by Alan West. And first of all, I would encourage you, as you find some of these articles on our website, pointofview.net, you might want to read them. You might want to post them on your Facebook page or Twitter account. You might want to send them to some individuals, because you might have some people saying, now, why are we causing this big fuss about this? I mean, no other nation is actually moving its embassy to Jerusalem, so why the big problem? And of course, there used to be a number of countries that did have their embassy in Jerusalem, and then they withdrew. The United States, I think, is setting a trend, but nevertheless, as Alan West pointed out in the first hour, 128 countries voted against us, even though in 1995, under then President Bill Clinton, there was a law to say that we would move our embassy to Jerusalem, but President Clinton did not do so. President Bush did not do so. President Obama did not do so. And to be fair, so far, even we have not done so, but we've planned to do so, and that will be the first time that in a long time there's been anybody that seemed to be really serious about moving our embassy to Jerusalem.
So the important word here is the word sovereignty. First of all, the sovereignty of Israel to have their embassies and have their capital where they want it to be. I mean, really, their capital is effectively in Jerusalem. I mean, that's where most of the
Knesset
government,
is there.
the Knesset is there.
Sure.
Most of the governing takes place there. It's just that the U.S. embassy and many other embassies are in Tel Aviv, and so they should get to choose as a nation where their capital is. But because of all the controversy and questions over Jerusalem, it has not been recognized. The other sovereignty application is to the United States. I mean, we passed a law in 1995 that we would move the capital, that we would recognize Jerusalem as the capital. We moved the embassy. And shouldn't we have the sovereign right to pass a law in our country to do that? And yet these other countries in the United Nations, certain countries, have they don't see us as having that right. And they have voted against Israel. They've persecuted Israel at the United Nations. I really don't think that's too strong a word to use over the years. And finally, we have an administration that is going to push back on that. I mean, I think this is such a long time coming. And, it's interesting. I saw this week in the Wall Street Journal a piece by John Bolton, who used to be the assistant to the ambassador of the United Nations under President George W. Bush. And, he talked about many ways in which we can defund the United Nations. So as, I mentioned earlier, I hope this was a first step, this defunding that Nikki Haley announced, and that there will be more. And he's given a pattern for that in this piece, and I'm sure he'll be advising the administration on that.
Yeah, John Bolton in Wall Street Journal, How to Defund the United Nations, the UN. And just a little footnote, he was a classmate of Clarence Thomas.
Really?
And one of the reasons, and then I'll take some phone calls, that Clarence Thomas changed his point of view, because when John Bolton was with Clarence Thomas in law school, Clarence Thomas was giving you kind of the typical liberal line about, we need more government and all that. And John Bolton changed his perspective with one question. He said, Clarence, in light of all the things that government did to those of you that were African Americans, why do you believe that the answer is government? And it caused him to say, yeah, what about? All sorts of discriminatory laws and all sorts of biases that were against African Americans, and it really kind of got him on a different path. And of course, today we've seen how that's played out in the Supreme Court. But anyway, it's just one of those interesting footnotes. And John Bolton, of course, served in the United Nations, probably will serve in some capacity, I suspect, in the future in the Trump administration. So certainly one of the stories we are talking about here today. And again, that was in just, last couple of days in the Wall Street Journal?
Yes, it was Tuesday.
I'm going to go back and read that. I missed it.
He mentioned that you could do this a little bit selectively. There's a few agencies, he says, that in the United Nations that do useful work. But, for instance, we pulled out of UNESCO already. I think it was last year.
I do remember that.
Or the year before.
Mm-hmm.
We pulled out, so that was one thing that we could do. He said we could selectively fund different agencies that we'd like and not fund ones we don't. He said we could also that the UN should move to a voluntary type of contribution instead of the way they do it now. And, he defines, and others, over the years, actually here at Point of View, we've made the case that the United Nations is basically an organization that exists to redistribute wealth from rich countries to poor countries. When Kathy Adams comes and joins us and we talk about the UN climate conferences and things, that's exactly what they do. They use the environment to do it. So it's global socialism. So why does the United States, a free market capitalist country, want to be involved in an organization that's forcing global socialism on the world?
And pay 22% for the privilege as well. Let's take some phone calls along the way. And some of you have some suggestions about stories in the past or other issues we can address. So let's go to Missouri, KTTK, and Debbie. Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Coming up. First of all, I just want to say I think President Trump is doing a wonderful job. If he didn't have to fight the far, far left progressive, half of the Democrats and half of the Republicans, I think a lot more would be done. And as far as the UN thing, I mean, that should have been done years ago. I mean, you look at the money that we sent to Iraq or Iran for, what was it, billions. Billions of dollars.
Yes, ma'am.
For what? For what? They burned our flag and say death to America. So, something needs to be done. I'm a firm believer that when President Trump won, that it was the power of God that did that. I can't think of anything else that did that. And I don't think this blue wave thing is anything to be concerned about, although I do believe that the Republicans need to get on board to ensure that there is no blue wave. But the Democrats don't have anything they don't have anything to stand on. They're not talking economy. They're not talking, infrastructure. They're not talking, Medicaid, Medicare. They're not talking anything other than impeach Trump. So I just, I pray every day that God continues to, give him the wisdom and the power. And I think that everyone out there listening that knows anything about the Constitution should tweet that to him, because he's not a politician, and there's probably parts of the Constitution that he doesn't know. So
I could say that for members of Congress, too. But let's take a break. We want to talk about Donald Trump. He was the big story, and we'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, if I were to ask you which professions have high suicide rates, you would probably mention military veterans suffering from PTSD. In their latest report, the Centers for Disease Control have found that the suicide rate for young male military veterans is higher than previously thought, but they found that it is lower in some states than the suicide rate for farmers. The high suicide rate for farmers is only now just beginning to get media attention. Mike Rossman is a psychologist who has been studying this issue for decades and has an appreciation for the stresses on farmers since he is also an Iowa farmer. Writing in the journal Behavioral Healthcare, he reminds us that farming has always been a stressful occupation because many of the factors that affect agricultural production are largely beyond the control of the producers. This is borne out by the latest statistics from the CDC. If you focus on all the people working in agriculture, farmers, farm laborers, ranchers, fishers, and lumber harvesters, they take their lives at a rate higher than any other occupation. The suicide rate for agricultural workers in 17 states is nearly 5 times higher compared to that of the general population. The reasons for this are many. Farmers are often reluctant to seek help. Often their farms are far away from healthcare centers. Pesticide exposure can lead to depression. They are isolated, and the cost of feed and equipment continues to rise while the prices they receive for food and fiber remain stagnant. This is a healthcare crisis that deserves attention. Perhaps this is the first time you've even heard about the suicide rate of farmers. Making citizens and politicians aware of this crisis is the first step. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Kind of looking back of 2017, looking ahead to 2018. And you have a comment? Open line, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter around the round table. Earlier, of course, we had Colonel Alan West with us as well. And before we get to Donald Trump, because I think Debbie set us up for that, while we're talking about the United Nations, there's something else. Not only does it promote socialism, it also promotes kind of a pro-abortion kind of agenda. And I remember a week ago we posted an article that had 81 accomplishments by Donald Trump, and one of those was signing the Mexico City policy. And if you think about this, we've gone from a pro-choice president to a pro-life president. And that's surprising because if you'd asked people a year or two ago if Donald Trump would be doing all these pro-life initiatives, probably wouldn't have guessed that he would. But that's certainly the case.
Yeah, and it's not what you think of Rex Tillerson as being, really involved in those social issues that much. But whoever is there in the White House is influencing this administration to be very pro-life on the UN front. You mentioned the Mexico City policy, which forbids the U.S. family planning, any of the family planning money from going to pro-abortion groups overseas. And the Trump administration didn't just reinstate that. They also expanded it to include $9 billion of global health aid that would not go to countries where abortion is promoted, or to groups that promote abortion. And so that's, big. And they also, Trump defunded the UN Population Fund for its complicity in forced abortion. And, I read this publication called The Friday Facts every week coming from Austin Ruse at CFAM, and they watch the UN over abortion and family issues. And this White House and this administration and State Department have in many ways been very good about countering the UN pro-abortion agenda. They have something that definitions matter in these UN documents. So the definition of reproductive health has been up for grabs for years. And, reproductive health to the liberal and to the left includes a fully available abortion. But they've stood against that being part of the definition of reproductive health. So the pressuring of countries to legalize abortion, there are many countries where abortion is still illegal. This always comes down from the top at the UN, and the U.S. has always been, right in there pressuring countries to allow abortion. Mm-hmm. But now with the Trump administration, that's changing, and there's a much more pro-life attitude at the UN. We haven't talked about this as much as we used to here on Point of View. It used to be a big, big issue in the pro-family movement. But I think it would be something that we could be watching in the next year.
We did have Austin Ruse on once this year, but we need to do that again because that is certainly the case. And again, if people would not have predicted this. They wouldn't expect that someone who has Ivanka Trump as your daughter, that this would be an issue. But it also has to do with the fact you have a vice president by the name of Mike Pence, mm-hmm. as well as a number of other pro-life people in the cabinet. And, of course, we can talk about Ben Carson. And, of course, when he was the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Tom Price, and some of those were pro-life. But again, just something that might have caught a few people off guard. We're going to take some more phone calls in just a minute. But Debbie did talk about Donald Trump. When you see the various articles coming out this year, it's amazing how, in some respects, they say the main story was Donald Trump, even if they, at the end, at Time Magazine, picked someone other than Donald Trump for their Man of the Year, with the Person of the Year, with all the women coming out on the sex scandals. But realistically, Donald Trump was in the news every single day, almost every single month, and whether he was controversial or making movements in one direction or another, he really was kind of the big story in 2017.
He was. And, I don't know if this is true, but I heard this reported about the Time Magazine Person of the Year was that, they get a bunch of people that they want to be considered for that, and then they go out and interview them and photograph them. And when Donald Trump was contacted for that, he said, well, if I'm not the person of the year, I'm not going to take the time for you to come out and interview me. So if I'm just in the running, forget it. And I mean, why does that not surprise us? It kind of sounds like him, doesn't it? So,
it does.
So they just went a different direction, didn't make him the person of the year, which is just fine. But yes, when you look through, and I always like to read right around New Year's, all the stories and go back and think about the year and what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And, hurricanes happened. The horrific attack at the concert in Las Vegas and the church in Sutherland Spring, Texas. I mean, there's many stories, but, the overwhelming proportion of the stories of our Donald Trump, he's the story, really, of the year. And he makes himself that a little bit more because he inserts himself at various times. But it was interesting because I saw two columns this week in the Wall Street Journal that kind of talked about this. And, he's got people that love him and hate him and people that put up with parts of what he does. And I thought it was very insightful of Daniel Hendinger to talk about two presidencies in 1 year because he talked about the accomplishment side of Donald Trump and the tweeting side of Donald Trump. And for conservatives, the accomplishment side has been stellar. It's been wonderful, really. Mm-hmm. But they don't sometimes like the tweets. And, for others, maybe they like the tweets and they don't like the accomplishments, people more on the left. But Ari Fleischer, who used to be the press secretary for George W. Bush, had another column that kind of jumped off on that. He said too many flags in Trump's first quarter.
Right.
Which
penalty
was his
flags.
First year. Penalty flags.
Yes.
Because he'll do something that's good. And so many of the policies and, the repealing of a lot of executive orders and just all the things that he's done have been good. But then sometimes we'll take a step back when we see what he's tweeted the next week. And he's constantly diverting attention from the good things to the tweets. And so he says that they're penalty flags. I mean, I'd love to hear what people think about that. Do they think that the tweets hurt or are the tweets, a good thing? But anyway, so we're looking at this president who I don't think the media covers his accomplishments enough. So a lot of people don't understand really what a great president he's been this year.
Well, even when you talk about the regulations, we talked about the executive order was to remove 2 regulations for every one. We talked about for a while that it was up to 7 to 1. Then the other day I said it was 17 to 1. The most recent one now is 22 to 1. Now, how many people know that? You'd have to have read Wall Street Journal probably to have seen that article and even know that number. And so that just shows you, again, part of it. So you can divide Donald Trump in 2 ways. Number one, his accomplishments in his tweeting. I also see you can divide the year. If the year had ended in June, I think the argument for Donald Trump and the presidency at that point would be a lot of sound and fury because not a lot had accomplished. But now that we go all the way till December, and even though you don't have the Affordable Care Act changed in any significant way, now you have the tax reform bill, and you actually do have some impact on the Affordable Care Act. So in some respects, the first part of the year was all sorts of promises from even individuals in Congress and the president, but it took a while. But eventually, you do have the kind of successes we're talking about. And so, again, I'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212 on air line if you'd like to join us as we're looking back over 2017, looking ahead to 2018, and would certainly recognize that Donald Trump wasn't the only story there. As we just pointed out a minute ago, Time Magazine talked about all the women that came forward as well. And those sexual harassment scandals are some ones as well that we can certainly address, but that's one of those topics we'll get to. Starting to get a bank of phone calls here, so if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. But, Penna, just before we take a break, I do want to mention that we're down to our last half hour of the broadcast 2017, and so we really do need to hear from some of our listeners. I know that, as always, whether it's during a Truth Team week or year-end or fiscal year-end, people wait to the last moment. Well, if they waited to the last moment, it is the last moment, isn't it?
It is. This is the end of the year, and of course, if you're making donations for tax purposes, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we're also dependent on the gifts of those who listen to us, those who benefit from us. And, we make decisions here at Point of View, too, based on what we did last year financially. So, for encouragement purposes, for the ministry, all those are reasons. But one big reason also that's been added by a generous donor is a match. And if you can match up to a certain point, and I'm not sure how much we have left on it. When I came in, I think we had about $15,000 left on it.
Getting smaller and smaller.
So it's shrinking, but we'd love not to leave any of that match on the table. If that is matched, then your gift is doubled. And so we encourage you to take that step today. And there are several ways to do it. You can go to the donate button at pointofview.net, or you can call the gift in at 800-347-5151. Or if you want to get it into the mail, it's P.O. Box 30, Dallas, Texas, 75221.
So, again, some great ways in which you can participate. And if you'd like to participate on air, we gave that number out. We'll get to it in just a minute and a couple of calls. So we'll take those first when we get back from the break. And let me just mention a little bit later, I want to talk about one of my commentaries next week, hysterics and hyperbole. We were convinced that passing the Tax Reform Act would be Armageddon, that rolling back net neutrality would be the end of the Internet. It didn't quite turn out that way, so we'll talk about that. But again, 800-347-5151. We want to hear from you. We'll be back.
When you think of something urgent, what comes to mind? You get hurt in an accident. You want help urgently. Your team is down by 4 with 90 seconds left. That's an urgent situation of a different kind. But how about this? Point of View has a matching challenge that ends when the calendar hits 2018. Christians like you have made an impact through Point of View for 45 years. You've helped shape hearts and minds, leading to amazing things in communities from coast to coast and beyond, shaping the future for the better. Many would say America's moral, political, and cultural situation is urgent, that our homeland needs biblical wisdom urgently. Please stop for a moment right now and give. Your investment will be doubled up to $65,000 thanks to a generous matching challenge. Time is up. Please give now. Visit pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. The need is urgent and any amount doubles. Pointofview.net. and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour of the final program in 2017. And again, as we have mentioned before, if you haven't had a chance to make your gift, I hope that you will do so. I'll be trying to I'm guess I'll be able to do, but sometimes I have to try to do some live Facebook posts and things like that during the weekend, so you might be watching for those. But again, just a reminder about the fact that we need your financial support so that we can end 2017 in the black, and anything you can do to help us is also aided by the fact that we still have our matching challenge, which will expire fairly quickly. So please take the time to join with us. Let's go to South Carolina first on the Good News Network. Mike, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. I appreciate everything y'all do, and I hope everybody will go in there and support the challenge.
Thank you.
I think President Trump should just keep tweeting, mainly because the media and the press is so against it. You don't know if you're getting fake news or true or whatever. So, and until they start, telling the truth and showing, some of his great accomplishments and stuff, I think he should just tweet on because of the fake media.
Keep tweeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, keep tweeting.
Well, and one of the arguments for that is the fact that there are more people that read his tweet, that, or at least receive his tweet, let's be honest about that, than actually watch the evening news. So you talk about the ability to bypass the mainstream press. There was a little of that, as Alan West referred to, in terms of the fireside chats. And also you have some other opportunities when you have a press conference. But people that have never been around the White House, not that I've worked in it, but I've talked to lots of people that have and studied it when I was at Georgetown, are really unaware at how difficult it is for the president, whoever that president may be, to get their message out directly to the American people. And this occurred to him early on is the best way to get his message out. Now, also, he does have an ability to punch up and to punch down. Now, when he punches up and he gives, as he did the other day, Elizabeth Warren a bad time, everybody kind of goes, good. I've been waiting for somebody to say something like that. But when he punches down to some obscure individual or some just general individual that's not in politics and didn't ask for it, that's, I think, when sometimes people have problems with some of his tweets. So I've made a distinction between punching up. After all, if he says something about Bernie Sanders, he should be able to take it. If he says something about Elizabeth Warren, she should better be able to take it because you're in the political arena. When you talk about some school teacher or some individual in political office in a school board, that strikes people as a little bit unfair there, don't you think?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you, and I appreciate everything y'all do.
So I guess that's tweet others as you'd like to be tweeted, right? It's kind of the golden rule of tweeting. I don't know. Anyway, let's go back to the phones. We have some other callers who want to say something about the tweeting as well. California, Mary, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I'd just like to say, Donald Trump, keep tweeting, whether it's up or down. I believe that it's good for everybody to be able to vent, and it helps them to make better decisions. And whether he's the president or anybody else, he's human. Why should he not be allowed to be human and vent just like everybody else?
What about the accusation that we need to have a civil discourse and that tweeting is not civil?
Well, neither's Facebook, let's face it. People are just people. And when you're venting, you don't tend to be civil all that much towards anybody. You're venting. You're venting out your opinion and you're venting out your anger, and sometimes when we're venting, we don't even think about what we're saying. And that's one of the reasons we have the civil discourse, is because people are just letting it out, rather than hanging on to it and letting it build up and then, make bad decisions because of it. And really, your mental health is better if you do vent. I believe anyway. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I know I always feel better after I go home after something happened and let it all out.
Yeah, I think Kerby and I, to some degree, but Kerby's always been one who's wanted to uplift and edify people with his commentary. And I think that's the way a lot of people operate, and it's really good. So this guy has been, a little bit different in that area. And I do think that it's matured a little bit, his process of tweeting, and perhaps, he's going to hone down that art in the next year. We'll see.
We'll see. One of the things I wanted to talk about is a commentary I have coming out next week, and it's called Hysterics and Hyperbole. And, I've seen some people writing about that, but this last year you can also see why there would be a desire on the part of Donald Trump to tweet and a desire on the part of some of these Republican leaders to say, wait a minute, everybody take a chill pill. Just think about this. You know, we just talked about in the first hour here the tax reform package. You had Democratic leaders that said it would usher in economic Armageddon, that people would die, that the tax cuts would kill people, which is our second article here. And that's quite a claim for really a tax bill that was significant maybe on the corporate side, but as we just pointed out, isn't all that significant on the individual side. You didn't go from 7 tax categories to 4. You went from 7 to 7. So that wasn't much. And then, as I pointed out before, it's really hard to say this is going to hurt the middle class when, as we pointed out, 70% of Americans take a standard deduction on their taxes, and you're doubling the standard deductions. But let's change it to something else. Net neutrality. We have heard people say that by removing these net neutrality rules, that this would be the end of the Internet as we know it. Now, Penna, just think this through for just a minute. We only implemented, that is, we as a country, the Obama administration in particular, implemented net neutrality less than 2 years ago. We went.
The Internet was fine before that.
It did just fine without that. And so it was able to survive for 2 decades. And now because you implement these rules over the last less than 2 years, that's all of a sudden going to end the Internet as we know it. I would hope that some people would see beyond some of the hyperbole in some of these arguments, don't you think?
Yeah, well, I think, somebody that coins names for certain movements, sometimes it's a very fortunate term, and net neutrality sounded really good when it's actually the opposite.
Well, and again, it came from the Net Communist Manifesto, so that was something that was kind of interesting. And again, let's be honest for just a minute. This is probably one of those issues where there's a lot of questions. Some people say, well, maybe there's some reasons why we would want to have net neutrality. And my argument would be, okay, let's say that even 6 months from now, we say maybe that wasn't the best decision at the FCC. Well, could we implement the rules again at the FCC? Of course we could. And frankly, the biggest argument for this was, what about individuals, especially this gets to one of my other commentaries, which ran yesterday on the so-called Big Four high-tech companies. What if they just get a little bit too monopolistic? Well, you don't have to look to the FCC to deal with that. You can look at the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. So these arguments and these lines, I know that sometimes these are being used by leaders in the Democratic Party and the Senate or the House trying to get some airtime. Maybe even sometimes Republicans use those to try to steal some of the media attention away from Donald Trump. But it doesn't help our debate. And it's back to this idea of civility a little bit. Maybe we should just begin to recognize that these constant appeals to hyperbole are just sort of wearing the American people out. And so I hope people will see beyond those in 2018.
I hope so, too. I think Alan West is right when he talks about the right, the conservatives and the Republicans, making their arguments well and, making them short. It's hard sometimes to make a good argument in a short soundbite, but we absolutely have to perfect that art because it works on the left. The left does that. And so you cannot ask people to dig deep into an issue when they're not. In a sense, you have to help appeal to their intellect and their sensibilities by having something short and yet having something that makes a lot of sense. I think if we could have the content, and it's really difficult sometimes to pack a lot of content into a short soundbite, but we have to perfect that art in order to do it because that's how they fight.
Some of the leaders of the Republican Party are listening right now. I would recommend Gary Bauer. Go to the Gary Bauer School of the quotable phrase, the soundbite. I remember years ago when Gary Bauer was starting to get some visibility. Peb Jackson and Jim Dobson and others talked about the fact that really Gary Bauer was a master of that. Newt Gingrich is pretty good at it, too. And it does seem to me that some of these individuals, when they're asked to try to describe how to turn on a light, give you a full philosophical and scientific investigation and discussion about how to make a light bulb. And sometimes they just need to make it a little simpler if they're going to really win over the debate. And again, the problem is in this world of social media, as we were talking about just a minute ago with Mary, sometimes the most strident arguments are the ones that get the attention, and they're the ones that least deserve some of that attention as well.
You know, I will say Ted Cruz is pretty good at it.
Yes,
Donald Trump is good at it, but he doesn't pack the content that you always need sometimes. And so I think maybe in coming months and years, we need to understand what we're fighting for, because we are fighting for really the heart and soul of the nation.
Let's take a break. We'll come back, finish off our last program of 2017 right after this.
We're at a moment in our history in which prayer during cabinet meetings is a bit disconcerting to many members of the media who cover the White House. Unusual and striking, even creepy, were words reporters used to describe a recent moment of prayer about the passage of historic tax legislation. The president seemed to enjoy taunting reporters a bit when, just as the bill gained final congressional approval, he took time at a cabinet meeting to call for prayer in gratitude for the success of tax-cutting and reforming efforts. President Trump turned the floor over to Dr. Ben Carson, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Dr. Carson led his fellow cabinet members in thanking God that they and the president had been willing to face the winds of controversy in pushing for this legislation. He expressed gratitude for the unity in Congress and asked that God would cause that unity to spread beyond party lines. And then Dr. Carson prayed, and I'm quoting him, "In this time of discord, distrust, and dishonesty, we ask that you will give us a spirit of gratitude, compassion, and common sense, and give us the wisdom to be able to guide this great nation in the future. We ask in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." What a great model to use as we pray for our government leaders. This prayer acknowledges what believers everywhere know. Our help is in the name of the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. As the new year begins, let's pray that our administration and our Congress will continue to take actions like this tax cut that will reduce government control over our lives. We should also thank God for the numerous, largely unsung accomplishments of 2017, especially the confirmation of many judges who understand that our rights come from God, not government. When flawed human leaders humbly ask God for strength and help, it's good. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, the last broadcast of 2017 from Point of View. Penna Dexter with me, and if you listen online right now, you heard Penna Dexter's commentary. We play it at this particular point in time. I might just mention that if you would like the Viewpoints commentaries, we make it very easy for you to sign up. As a matter of fact, as you go there, it says never miss a Viewpoint. Sign up here. You receive mine Monday through Friday. You receive Penna's on Saturday, and it's entitled Prayer for 2018. Couple issues there. First of all, talking about the fact that the other day in a meeting, the president said, we need to have a time of prayer. Dr. Carson, why don't you pray for us? Now, the press went nuts because, of course, he also said that you and the press can stay. Matter of fact, you probably need it more than anybody. But you actually have part of that prayer. And it was a very eloquent prayer, but it's amazing how many members of the White House staff and White House press corps said that it was unusual, some even striking, creepy. What about that?
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't been unusual in our history for presidents to ask for the help of God. The presidency is huge. It's way too big for any one man. The running of the government is a big responsibility. If you believe biblical truth, you know that the leaders are placed there by God, and he's certainly going to answer requests for help. And so that's what President Trump was doing. And this was right in the thick of the vote for the tax cut and the tax reform. And, we knew by this time that it was going to pass, and he wanted to thank God. And he had Ben Carson do it, of course, and Ben Carson did a beautiful job. And the theology of the prayer, when he said, in this time of discord, distrust, and dishonesty, we ask that you give us a spirit of gratitude, compassion, and common sense. I mean, those are all qualities and virtues that ought to be requested, that we need in governing, to thank God for this success here. And then compassion. We do need to be governing with compassion. And then common sense, too, because compassion can go way too far. You need common sense to reign. So, it was just a wonderful prayer. And I thought, and he was also thanking God for the fact that the people in the administration who pushed for the tax cut had taken a lot of bullets for it. And even members of Congress, and people fought hard. And so he was thanking God for that. This is all not creepy. It shouldn't be shocking. It should be a common practice. And the fact that he did it, and he made sure that the press knew he was doing it, and they could report on it or not. And I mean, I looked around to see how it was reported on, and some of that was just amazing that some of these reporters have no category for prayer in a cabinet meeting. But some people were fairly fair about it. It wasn't really given a lot of play, but I want to give it some play. I want the people that get the viewpoint tomorrow to read about it and to really thank God that we actually have a president that he may not be the most eloquent public prayer person that prays, but he knows enough to acknowledge God and thank him for a big success. And he did it.
And as that's a setup to something we talked about yesterday, because David French 2 days ago wrote a piece about a post-Christian America. And he said, if I had to pick one of the most underappreciated and underreported stories of 2017, it would be that a post-Christian America is more vicious, that the triumph of secularists in rendering America more polarized, not less, and remove from the public square biblical admonitions such as love your enemies, and the hatred has more room to grow. And he says, when the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control wither, then the culture is far more coarse. And it just gets us back to the reality that, as I've said so many times before, anybody looking at our history, you can look at our historical perspectives from a secular point of view. You can certainly look at all the people who brought on this program. I think most people would have to acknowledge that Christianity, a Judeo-Christian philosophy, was important in the founding of this republic. But today, these elite groups, especially people in the press and some in the academy, are convinced that even though it might have been important in the founding of this country, it's not important in the maintenance of this country. And I think we need to come back and recognize how important prayer is, how important some of these biblical principles are. And that's, of course, what we talk about here on Point of View on a regular basis.
Sometimes the left, they try to take the descriptor of compassion as their own, that they're the more compassionate side of the equation. But it's really not true. We've seen that this year, I think, in all of the different racial types of controversies that have taken place, that really what comes from deep down from the heart, usually if you have a biblical foundation, you do have a compassion that comes from God. But the issue is, I think, with the left is often the compassion is used to control people. The care that's given for certain sectors of society, yes, they may be meeting a need, but it's not meeting in the best way, and it makes them dependent and then allows them to be controlled. And so in another kind of world where people are given the tools or the encouragement to make their lives better themselves, and their religion and their faith is encouraged, not discouraged, that's where you have true compassion. That's where you have better discourse and better civility. The country is so divided right now, and I'm just hoping, we worried under President Obama that we would never move back to the civil society, that we would never move back to the type of culture where faith and religion really influences the culture. But now I think there's hope for that. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I think there's hope.
Well, I would think so, too. And again, we'll see this in some of the Supreme Court decisions. Some people say, what's going to happen in 2018? Well, the Supreme Court's going to rule on an issue of religious liberty, Jack Phillips, and that's not going to come down until June, probably. But in January, I think we're going to be talking about something else you addressed, and that is they're talking about welfare reform. Well, we haven't talked about tax reform since Reagan. We really haven't talked about welfare reform since Clinton, and that was actually something that was only signed in the 11th hour by President Clinton after it was pushed through by Newt Gingrich. But I think we're going to be talking about some of those issues, and the faith component is going to be important. And certainly to be able to think about these issues from a biblical point of view is going to make point of view as important as it always was. So as we're coming to the end here of 2017, first of all, of course, I want to wish you a Happy New Year. But also, I think it's about time, just one more time before we get off the air, to remind people that they have a chance to actually join with us financially. And we are down to the last few minutes of the broadcast. What would you say to all our listeners out there?
Well, number one, we've got a grant on the table, so your gift will be doubled. And I think that's a big deal. That always is a big motivator for me to know that, whatever I decide to give, actually the ministry will benefit twice as much. Secondly, that's how we make our decisions. If we meet our goals financially this year, then we can move forward and do the things that we had hoped to do next year. So that's another. And just because this is how God blesses this ministry, it's through you. It's through the listener. And so would you ask him right now, what is the best gift that you can give? If you haven't given yet here at year end, we ask that you think seriously about doing so.
And again, I would encourage you to support the radio station that's carrying this program. Kelly Shackelford's not here, but he certainly would appreciate your financial support at First Liberty. And recognize that you will still probably be able to go to your church on Saturday or Sunday. Most people go on Sunday, but some go on Saturday. And so you can still perhaps leave a donation there. But since we're going off the air, let me just say that if you want to send in your check, you better get it in the mailbox today or at the latest tomorrow, because then that is going to be important to not only have it dated December 30th, 31st, but also postmarked December 30th. So again, that address is Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. But I'll tell you what, even though we're going off the air, we'll still have some people that will answer the phone, and that number is 800-347-5151. This is a number we've given during our Truth Team Week, and we encourage you to give us a call, 800-347-5151. If you're near a computer, then all you have to do is click on pointofview.net, click on the banner, and we have our matching challenge, which at the moment is still necessary for you to help fulfill. And as Penna said, don't leave any money on the table. So I hope you appreciated the conversation. We will be doing a tape program on Monday. We'll be back here on live on Tuesday. I want to thank Andrew and Steve. Have a great weekend. Happy New Year. We'll see you next year.
When you think of something urgent, what comes to mind? You get hurt in an accident. You want help urgently. Your team is down by 4 with 90 seconds left. That's an urgent situation of a different kind. But how about this? Point of View has a matching challenge that ends when the calendar hits 2018. Christians like you have made an impact through Point of View for 45 years. You've helped shape hearts and minds, leading to amazing things in communities from coast to coast and beyond, shaping the future for the better. Many would say America's moral, political, and cultural situation is urgent, that our homeland needs biblical wisdom urgently. Please stop for a moment right now and give. Your investment will be doubled up to $65,000 thanks to a generous matching challenge. Time is up. Please give now. Visit pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. The need is urgent, and any amount doubles. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151.